Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ian Morrison. I'm the chair of the Electoral Area Services Committee. I'd like to welcome everybody in the gallery and watching our live streamed meeting as well. I'd like to just note that this meeting is taking place in the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, and I'd like that acknowledged, and I'd like to ask people in the room to please turn off or make silent any of your electronic devices, if you would, please. I'd also like to welcome Alternate Director Bomford from Electoral Area D and Director Yanni DiNardo's place. We all have had an opportunity to look at the agenda that was published. Is there any additions or concerns around the agenda? Seeing none, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda as published? Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Kuhn. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion carries. Minutes of our March 21st meeting, Mr. Blackwell.
Recommendation is that the minutes of the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of March 21st, 2018 be adopted.
Moved by Director Davis, seconded by Director Kuhn. Any discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion carries. Is there any business arising from the minutes, Mr. Blackwell?
There is no business arising from the minutes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Going to number 4, public input period. Is there anyone in the gallery today that would like to provide some input as to the items on the agenda today? The public input procedure policy is on the screen, and I believe it's even available to those people watching at home. Is there anyone who'd like to provide some input?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Pardon me, I just rushed up here, so I'm a little short of breath. I'd like to speak to the cannabis regulations. We don't have to provide our name anymore. Thank you, Mr. Tory. Yeah.
That's true. Go ahead, Ms.
I am concerned with the moving forward of the cannabis regulations. I understand that they are necessary, but what I'm concerned about is what teeth will it have from the federal government? That whatever is passed today will actually be enforceable for the CVRD. One of the other things that I'm worried about is the agricultural land, that the CVRD may be believing that they just have to abide with whatever the federal government and the BC government allot for agricultural land use. This committee and this board has often gone up against federal and provincial governments regarding their regulations, the derelict vessels, MOTI for improvements to our road systems. And I think we have a big enough threat to our agricultural land and food production that we should be very cautious. The CRD in Victoria is asking for caution as we see our agricultural lands being used for development and non-food production. And I would also like to mention that if you do move forward on this, I would like to ask that we're talking about regionalizing our zoning and our OCPs and a harmonization of that. Why are we doing 9 different bylaws? And if you do move forward, please consider having one meeting that it covers all the 9 electoral areas and in a venue that is appropriate. I don't think the boardroom will be big enough to support all the interested parties. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would like to provide input to the committee today? last time? Excellent. Let's move on to our next items. We have our, from School District 79, the board chair, Candace Spilsbury, who's here to present as a delegation today. I welcome you to our committee, and please press the button and you'll see the red light come on the microphone so that everybody at home can hear you as well.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Press the,
Put on again.
yes,
All right.
perfect.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for accepting me as a delegation. I'm here to talk to you about the strategic priorities from our board, and I put a brochure on each of your tables there for us to walk through. I'd like to highlight the work that we've been doing for the last couple of years, and we have a short term yet to try to complete all of it, but you will notice as we go that some is ongoing forever. So I'd like to talk to you about what we've done so far. So if you just look at the front page, you'll notice that it is a celebration. It's for our Aboriginal graduates who come into Cowichan Bay on canoes. They canoe to the ocean front, and on the back side of the brochure is a picture of the actual celebration that is held there. It is one of our most beautiful, meaningful, and powerful events that occur in our school district every year. And if you watch our statistics, you will know that the number of Aboriginal graduates is increasing, has been for the last years that I've been on the board, and we're very proud of that fact. Turning over the first page, you'll notice that we have outlined vision, mission, and values, the usual statements for strategic planning. What's important to us is particularly our mission statement, that it's about educational excellence for every student in every classroom in every school. And we try our best with the dedicated staff that we have, which now is up to 1,200 people that are employed through the school district, and about 600 of those are teachers. So we have a lot of people working toward this goal. At the bottom of the page there, you'll notice another picture, and that's another proud moment for us. Students in grades 2 and 3 at Ecole Cobble Hill Elementary wrote a very beautiful song about Canada in French and English and entered a contest that was spun by the Lieutenant Governor, and they won. And so the Lieutenant Governor came to the school and presented the award, and that was a great honor for us. But even more so for them was when the Royals came to Victoria, and you'll see them in the photos there, they were invited to Government House to sing their song. It truly was very special for us. Over the next page, you'll notice the district priorities, and when you attended school, those probably were very different priorities in those days. With our new curriculum, we're trying for personalized, engaged, experiential learning for every student. And it's called educational transformation. And it started a couple of years ago with the K-9 program, and now is moving into the 10 to 12, our graduation program. And at the bottom of that page, you'll see the kind of education that we're trying to provide. Here you see students out on a clam bed with teachers, scientists, fisheries officers, and elders, and they're learning about the history and preservation of clam beds. Certainly, it's different than in my day of being a student and my day as being a teacher. We were much more classroom focused. Now we're trying to get into land focused. And we've certainly seen that that's where engaged, personalized, and experiential learning happens. You may be familiar with a program at Cowichan Secondary called the Land-Based Program. This is a new kind of program for us, because imagine the secondary school with all its timetabling and different courses, and you know, one student has 8 teachers, or maybe 9 if they're taking 9 courses for a semester. But the land-based program is in one classroom all semester, same students, same teachers. And so they work through all of their course requirements, their English, their math, their science, their social studies, their PE, all of those courses that they need credit in one program. So it's like an elementary school classroom in a secondary school. And it's been very popular and has spread. So Francis Kelsey also has a similar kind of program. What happens is kids are out on the land. At Francis Kelsey, I know they built trails as part of that experience. At Cowichan Secondary, they are continuing more and more development into the community, and the community also coming in to share those experiences about real life. And that's part of the new curriculum, where that real life piece is trying to be a part of what's happening. So you may have read about the CAP project in the newspaper, or perhaps you have a relative that's attending or connected to École Mount Prévost, where the students were invited to be part of looking after a pet care center by building cat houses for that pets center. And so they did. And so what the schools are trying to do is reach out to the community to find life projects that could relate to the curriculum, so students can get that understanding of where they're going in the future. And in September, you will have known by the papers also probably that we're reopening what used to be Mill Bay Elementary, and it's going to be a nature school for K-3, we think, unless we have an overload of intermediate students who also want a nature school. And that is a school that is going to mimic some of the other school districts that have put a similar program in place, where students are outside learning in the outdoors about doing math and doing their English and all of those things, and coming back and forth. We think it's going to be a very successful program. Also at Cowichan Secondary, there's something called community-based program, and that is one classroom, well actually it's 2 classroom teachers with a group that stay together all year, and they learn together within that classroom and learn all of their core subjects. So those are the kinds of new ways that are being explored within education these days. We have become a leader in that project, and that's because of the enthusiasm which our teachers are adopting this new way of providing education. The other piece of education I'd like to talk to you about just briefly, and again with some sense of pride, is the dual credit trades program, and that is a partnership with VIU. 4 years ago, when we began as a board, there were 8 students in that program. Today we have 310. And the way that it has changed our programming for kids is some students are taking courses at secondary schools as well as VIU, for example, Communications 12 in their English 12. They could be also registered in English, I believe it's 101. So they would be taking one course but getting credit in both places. And I know we're doing that in chemistry and other academics. As well, we have the trade school between us, which is offering certification in welding, electricity, hairdressing, heating and ventilation, culinary arts, and carpentry. So there is a lot of change going on, but it is really exciting change, because it's engaging not only our learners, but it's engaging our teachers. And our board is really excited by the spirit of innovation by our staff as they redesign this curriculum. And by the other requirement that is embedding K-12, or pardon me, Aboriginal principles of learning and Aboriginal content throughout the whole K-12 curriculum in every course, in every class. And that's really part of the reconciliation efforts that we are embarked on. We're also really excited by the involvement of our students learning on the land and the community coming into schools, and by the deep engagement, leadership, and voice of our students. We've always said we listen to our students, but we listened to them, but we didn't really act on that information in the past. And we've learned to act on it now, because kids are so talented and so bright and so creative that we can learn from them.
Candace, can you stop for just a second there?
Have I
You're at 10
done
minutes.
my 10 minutes?
Yeah, so I'm
Okay,
just going to
wow.
ask for the committee for a motion to extend your speaking period. Moved by Director Davis, seconded by Director Acton. Must be unanimous. All those in favor? Opposed? None. Continue, please.
My apologies. I thought I had this down to 10 minutes, but there's just a couple of things that I would reference. First, I would get to the capital planning in this brochure, which talks about us developing a plan for our buildings, and it has to be a 10-year plan. And the piece I want to talk to you about is the very exciting announcement this week that Cowichan Secondary School is going to have a direction to the next step of providing either only a seismic upgrade, or a seismic upgrade and a partially replacement, or a full replacement. What it means is we have to develop what's called a project definition report by the end of October. And in that, we have to demonstrate which of those areas is the best going forward for the next 40 years. We've already done some development, and we are very adamant as a group, working with some key leaders in the community, that it would be best for us as a community to have the school replaced. It will be the most longevity kind of look at providing for our students. We also are experiencing enrollment growth. If you haven't looked at the demographic report that's on our website, it talks about where the growth is coming and how fast. And the partial response from us already is to go in the south and develop a new area for kids to learn in, a new school, because the south is the first piece that's coming in as enrollment growth for us, but all of the Cowichan Valley, except in the west is staying stable, but the rest of the valley is growing for us. So I encourage you to do whatever you can to support us on that. And the last thing I'd say is, in all my years of education, I've never seen kids so engaged in their learning. And enjoying it so much. And what students say to me is, they are staying focused, they are getting work done, and that it is stress-free. And I think that's the best news that we as a board can hear. So thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very exciting. I'd ask if you could stay there, and we'll turn to committee and see if there's any questions for you, Director Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Has Frances Kelsey been outgrown already, or we're getting there? Or?
It's certainly starting to show some areas where we need more space coming in. Yes. What we're finding is all of our elementary schools, so all of the south schools are full. We have one classroom left at George Bonner, and then from there, all of our other classrooms, except in the west, are full.
Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. After sitting on a few different committees, it often comes up a lack of youth representation, either for their input or just their ideas. Like you said, they're so creative. So I can't speak for the whole board, but I hope that the CVRD would be accommodating if to speak with the school board and be able to help work together somehow where we could increase that level of engagement with the youth and have them sit on different boards where we can. And I'm wondering, is there any plans in the curriculum to support or to encourage kids to get involved with local government or having their voices heard in those kind of ways?
At this point, there is no initiative around that idea, but it's a good one. And we have our district student advisory committee, who is very active in terms of their own schools and their communities around their schools, but not in levels of government. And I'll certainly take that back. Thank you.
Got Director Dory, then Nicholson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Candace, I consider health and fitness very important for learning, for living, for being a contributing member to society. Have you considered daily physical education and promoting physical and health in the schools to a more degree than we have in the last 20 years or so?
Well, you'll be happy to hear that daily physical education is a requirement now in our curriculum. And so each one of our schools is attentive to that. We also are very supportive of outdoor learning. So going outside is part of that. What you may be interested to know also is, because I was, at the secondary schools, we now have fitness choices like yoga and dance, and I think that whole idea of branching out in terms of how to get your fitness is really being accommodated.
Oh, good. Didn't mention anything about it in here.
No.
No, thank you.
Director Nicholson.
Thank you. Thanks for the update. It was great. I'm curious about, wasn't that long ago we were closing schools, and now we're talking about needing schools. And my Cowichan Station was very fortunate to get a 40-year lease of the old Cowichan Station Elementary School when it was closed in 2007. So I'm wondering if you have a policy about what would happen when you're reviewing possibilities for opening new schools or expanding, how you will treat those kind of properties that were closed and have gone to other community uses.
Well, as you mentioned, you've got a long-term lease at Cowichan Station, and certainly there were some other lease agreements, but they've gone through the sale program since then. So I believe Cowichan Station is the only school. Can you support me on that, Mr. Dory, or not? You're still in lease as well? No, you bought it, right? Yes, and bought Elsie Miles as well. So I believe Cowichan Station is the only one that is still directly linked with the school district, and certainly you've got a lot of years left on that lease, and perhaps it's time for us to talk about what your community association would like to do in the future.
Thank you. I've got myself on the list, and just a couple of quick comments in regards to Director Acton's question. I'm really proud of my daughter's participation in DSAC through I think 11 and 12, and I think there's great opportunities for kids that are inclined to want to get up and get out there and participate. They did great work. I think they did some backpack programs and the likes. So that's really neat. I also wanted to comment very briefly on this front page of your brochure. My daughter was thrilled to not only graduate, but, you know, as a straight A student and participated in this in 2017. And it was really a highlight of the whole school process and graduation. And I'm really glad to see the school district participating with local First Nations for something as important as this. So good work on that. And I'm thrilled to see it on the front page of your brochure. My next question is about, and you're right, areas are growing, and there's areas that are just stable and not growing, and specifically the Cowichan Lake area. Yet we've got inventories of schools. There's, in Director Kuhn's area, there's still some assets around the town of Lake Cowichan. My understanding is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that there's lineups, there's wait lists for French immersion in the Cowichan Valley. Is that
That's
true?
correct, yes.
You know, considering that we have assets, and I'm talking about community revitalization, because the Cowichan Lake area is probably one of the most affordable purchase housing areas in the Cowichan Valley. And lots of young families are looking at establishing themselves, having opportunity and access to French immersion. Has there been any thought given to using some of your assets that are in place and establishing French immersion in the western part of the school district?
It's not been a discussion that I've been a part of, but I'm sure that, you know, at some point there has been some thinking. In the lake, we don't have a lot of buildings left. We do have UBO, of course, and A.B. Greenwell has now been given over to the town of Lake Cowichan. So there's just Stanley Gordon sitting empty, but we're using it for inventory and building some needed pieces for our own other schools. So I'm not sure, but that's an interesting idea and something that I'm sure that I will offer for us to debate on, and I'm sure there will be engaged interest.
Thank you for that, and I would encourage that this time next year when you're doing a tour and talking to elected officials, that I think that the directors for area and I and myself would like to have this conversation when you're meeting with the Mayor and Council of Lake Cowichan. I think that would be very helpful. So thank you very much for coming today. I appreciate it, and we'll move on to the next item. Thank you again for coming, and hopefully we'll be doing this again next year.
Thank you for having me.
I would like to just take a brief moment and ask everyone in the room to please double check your electronic devices. We have had, to my count, about 4 or 5 noise-making events in the school board chair's presentation. Can you please double check your devices now? All right, everybody pretty sure we're got our devices off. On to the next item, number 6. We have number 1, Mr. Blackwell.
So the recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid, Electoral Area A, Mill Bay Malahat, in the amount of $500 be provided to Francis Kelsey Secondary School Dry Grad Committee to support its Dry Grad celebrations.
Moved by Director Davis, seconded by Director Clement. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. Next item.
The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid, Electoral Area B, Shawnigan Lake, in the amount of $500 be provided to the Red Willow Women's Society to support the acquisition of office space in Duncan for child protection services offered to Aboriginal women in the community.
Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Davis. Any discussion? I'll call the question. Oh, is that discussion or vote? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next item.
The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid, Electoral Area D, Cowichan Bay, in the amount of $2,500 be provided to Cheetah Slow, Cowichan, to support the Cheetah Slow Society 2018 events.
Moved by alternate Director Momford, seconded by Director Clement. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion carries. Next item.
The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid, Electoral Area D, Cowichan Bay, in the amount of $500 be provided to Cowichan Bay Improvement Association to support the Maritime Center Boat Festival on July 7th and 8th, 2018.
Moved by alternate Director Bomford, seconded by Director Clement. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion carries. Next item, we have 6 information items. Are there any questions of committee on those items? Seeing none, go to reports. R1, John Munn, the lectern is yours.
Is that better? For your information, the applicants. So, this report is application 03C, Development Variance Permit, DVP, at 4127 Chelsea Place. And as you can see, the location of the lot here, as in your attachments, is on the lower side of Chelsea Place, and the zoning is essentially in the middle of the zone. The site conditions are such that the request is at the rear of the property. You'll note, I guess, wanted to go back one. Whoops. Can you back me up one or two? Or do I have to do that? Hang on. Sorry about that. There we go. So just to note that this lot you can see is 5-sided. And that means that not only does it have a front and rear yard, the rear is defined as opposite the front. So the long line on the west is the rear, and the short line, which you might expect to be the rear, is an interior side lot line. So the application at hand is for a new accessory building, a garage, to be located in that corner, in the narrow end of the pie shape of the lot. The variance requested is for the side lot line and the rear lot line. So that would be the just under a meter for the interior lot line, and then from 4.5 meters for the rear lot line down to 1.53 meters. Let's take a look at the site again here. There's the view of the house from the cul-de-sac, and then a couple of pictures of the storage area on the property intended for the new garage. The purpose stated by the applicant for putting the garage back there was to have it as far to the rear as possible, and to the rear of some fruit trees, and the complications that arise from that. There are 2 letters received from neighbors regarding the fact that, not that it was close to the lot lines, but that it was close to some trees, and they were afraid that some root destabilization may upset trees. And so the applicant did call in a tree service to assess that situation. So, and talked with the neighbors after that. So, in conclusion, their issues were addressed as far as I know, and subsequently we've got a recommendation to approve. And that it be, the recommendation is that it be recommended to the board that application number, oh my gosh,
Hold off on that for a second, John.
that's not the right recommendation. This is,
Well, we're getting the right recommendation. Why don't we stop and ask if there's any questions of committee for you?
okay. I can read the recommendation from the report.
We'll have Mr. Blackwell do that. Committee have any questions for staff? Director Dory.
In a multi-sided lot, what is your definition of the rear?
Rear is the opposite front. So as the front lot line is at the cul-de-sac, it's curved, of course, but it's generally on the east, and opposite is the west.
Yeah. So if there's a long, say there's two opposites.
Yes.
Does it, the long side, is it normally the side and the short side is the back side? This is a
I think
It's a technical question.
I think the question's not in order. It's hypothetical. It doesn't pertain to this, so we'll go on to the next one. Any other questions around this? You got the answer to your first question.
Yeah, okay. Now, when it comes to setbacks, is there a different number between the side setback and the rear setback?
Yes, the rear is 4.5 meters for an accessory building, and the sides would be 1, I believe, because we're going from 1 meter to 0.91 meters.
Yeah, so it is relevant in that they're putting the building at the back side and naming the rear side is important when it comes to the figures.
It is, and there are cases where you do have some lot lines. For example, if this lot its rear side was on another street, it's possible it could be defined as having two fronts.
Oh, okay,
But that anomaly doesn't exist here exactly.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Director Nicholson.
Yeah, this question is probably more for Mr. Blackwell, because I think most of our reports today were about variances, which made me focus on the issue of variances, or at least ask myself questions about variances. And there doesn't seem to be, is there like a standard rationale for why we have variances and why they vary from one area to the next? Or is this something that should be harmonized a little bit better? Or is it relate to lot size? Or what exactly decides what a variance, what a setback ought to be?
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you. I'm happy that you asked that question. So in short, we use an Ouija board. It's not commonly known. So every variance is dealt with or assessed on a case-by-case basis. You'll notice a clause in most of the reports that speaks to kind of the desire to change how we do things a little bit. In other words, I guess what I'm trying to gently suggest is that in the past there's been a fairly liberal approach to accommodating people's requests, and it was less to do perhaps with a sound technical argument, more to do with accommodating people's desires. So the few variances that have come before us at the staff level really highlight the need to perhaps have a higher standard around the issue of variances. So starting to introduce kind of the notion of hardship with respect to variance requests as part of the consideration, rather than more of a subjective approach to the consideration of variances. So certainly what staff does is it assesses right now the potential impact of variance on a property, but it's not, the level of assessment is not particularly fine-tuned. In other words, it's more of a general assessment, and kind of the technical latitude that we could rely on is much greater. And that's what we're going to be looking at doing, is providing greater technical analysis around these kinds of variances so that we have a more systematic approach.
Director Nicholson, as a follow-up, and if it's of a general nature, I'm thinking we should perhaps deal with this particular one and then have a discussion before the next application, because we're really going into general as opposed to the specifics of this. I want your question to be answered, and for those of you that have noticed in the reports, our general manager has made comment on every variance permit in our agenda today, so can you, is it specific to this one, or is it of a more general nature, your follow-up?
Well, I'm just trying to understand the technical rationale for these particular setback requirements and why we would vary them. But it sounds like isn't a technical rationale for the existing rules, and so we need to look at the pictures and the neighbors' comments and say, oh, that looks like it's reasonable because the planner thinks it's reasonable too. Okay, I'm there, but my other question is about, it led me to think about lot size and lot coverage, and we don't seem to speak to that, although in some of the other reports I think we mentioned it, and the issue, you know, it doesn't seem to be any consistency here on this. So
Mr.
it's
Blackwell?
all arbitrary right now.
Well, again, a very good point. So the question of consistency is something we absolutely want to be addressing through what is set out in that staff report. Right now, the level of assessment is, I would say, reasonably consistent amongst planners, but you know, these assessments are somewhat individualized based on the particular perspective of the planner reviewing it. So two different planners could review any given variance and have slightly differing perspectives on it. I wouldn't suggest vastly different, but marginally different. So part of what we want to do is kind of standardize this approach. Certainly things like lot coverage is one of the fundamental questions that staff assesses. But again, that's kind of the macro scale or coarse-grained analysis that's done. There's much more analysis that could be done with regard to impacts like this. For instance, the impact of a building that close to a property line also has implications with regard to how the adjacent neighbor can utilize their property and how close they can have in a building abutting a proposed building such as this. There can be an impact with regard to fire separation, as an example. So that's a level of fine-grained analysis that we don't normally do, and it's a place that we want to start examining how we can do this in more detail.
Okay.
Yeah, we're really way off this application, and we'll
Actually,
go
we're
right to it right after. In regards to this application?
This is about this application.
Okay.
So this is a two-story outbuilding. Do we have any requirements about 2 stories? Because that seems to me potentially to I mean, I know this neighborhood a little bit, and just wondering how well this structure will fit in from a two-story perspective.
Mr. Munt?
Normally there are height requirements, but I believe in this zone, there's no height requirement.
Thank you. So looking at committee, no more questions for staff. Does anybody have any questions for the applicant? Does the applicant have anything to add? Can I ask you a question? No, you can provide information to us if you'd like, but come on up to the microphone if you have something to add, please. Can we turn the microphone on, John?
Thank you for taking the time today. Our property is odd, and to utilize it properly, and not get rid of the existing fruit trees that are there, it makes sense. Being five-sided, it is very challenging to make the property work any other way. We are going to work with our neighbors. Of course, the tree issue, we would never build a building and jeopardize the trees behind it, because that seems ridiculous to have trees fall in a new building. So we will work with them, and we will work with the existing trees to make sure that our property, of course, is safe and our neighbors are happy, because that's what makes the neighborhood tick. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Hang on, we've got
Oh,
a
sorry.
question from a director now. Director Dory.
Thank you. The tree that you're going to take out, are you taking it out roots and all, or just cutting it down?
That would be for the discretion of the tree expert that we have there. And it hasn't even been decided it would come down. It would be, we've spoken with the neighbors, and just with wind, taking that into consideration, we will pay for limbing on their side as well as our side to take out any of the branches that are not healthy, and are any of the snags, I think they're called.
So the building is not being built in where the tree is standing now?
No,
No,
no, they're behind it. So the concern was that the tree that the tree specialist said that he recommended removing was because there was some rot on it, and he was saying just for the health of all the trees that are there, he recommended taking it out, just
Yeah,
for
so it
tree
doesn't
health.
come down later. Okay.
Yeah, no, we're not taking out any trees to build this building. It's going on the rear part of our property. If we build it forward more, we would have to take out our existing fruit trees, and then we would have dead space at the back of our property, because it's quite long pie-shaped, which doesn't make sense for us to do that, because then we're essentially getting rid of part of our property.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Any further questions for the applicant? Seeing none, I'm going to turn to the director for the area. Move the recommendation, seconded by Director Acton. Mr. Blackwell, would you read the recommendation, please?
Thank you. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that development variance permit application number 03-C-17 DVP at 4172 Chelsea Place to vary section 10.3.4 of zoning bylaw number 3520 be approved as follows. 1, a reduced interior side parcel line setback on the east for an accessory building from 1 meter to 0.91 meters. And 2, a reduced rear parcel line setback on the west for an accessory building from 4.5 meters to 1.53 meters.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion carries. Thank you, John. I'm going to ask, you're done. I'm going to ask a last time that staff and everybody in the room turn off your electronic devices. Not turn to silent, turn to vibrate, turn them off. And I'm going to ask for a 5-minute break before we consider the next item. Can I talk to you inside for a second? Director Dory, will you rejoin us, please? I'd like to we're back in session, make everybody aware that items recommended for approval will be going to the next board meeting on Wednesday, April 11th. And while this next discussion isn't on the agenda, and I'm hoping we won't have to take too much time to discuss it, there was a note in that application and the next, and Director Nicholson brought up a fine point about variances and consistency and the like, and I just want to make a brief comment or two before we proceed to the next item. If anybody has any questions for our general manager or other staff, you could perhaps ask them, but I've been here almost 10 years, Director Dory a little longer, alternate Director Bomford here before that. Variances have always been an interesting discussion around the table. And despite the rigor and the regulations that are on the books and to form the basis of how we do business and where houses are sited and all of that information, it's there. Where the system gets to a point where just about anybody thinks that they can make application for a variance at the CVRD and get it, lies pretty much solely with the elected officials sitting around this table. I have seen variances granted for fences that are over height that shouldn't be. I've seen, well, it's from soup to nuts. And staff will make recommendations, and I don't know whether it's a case of who you know or the specific circumstances, but there are far more variances granted in the Cowichan Valley Regional District than are ever denied. And I think that it was very, very well explained in the last report as to the details around why this was being asked for. It was very clear to me. The staff were very clear as to what the setbacks were and what the regulations were. And I can understand why staff are recommending these come to committee, because if I was in their shoes, I would know which way the elected officials would go on these things. So it makes sense for them to bring these forward. This rests with us. The regulations are there. If we read them and understand them, we can make decisions on the veracity and the enforcement of them. Often these are from circumstances where there's irregular lots or irregular features, and people are trying to be made whole through the variance process. And if we feel that that's appropriate, then we can grant variances. If we feel it isn't, we can deny variances. So there's far more discussion could be had on this. I don't know whether it's appropriate to have today or not, but I would turn to Mr. Blackwell and ask him if he has anything to add.
Well, thank you. I don't think I could add much to that.
Put the spotlight on any other staff. Do any of the committee members have any questions they'd like to pose of staff? Seeing none, let's go to the next item. Number 2 is Ms. Rondeau. Thank you, Ms. Rondeau. How'd you like that warm up?
Great, thank you. Can I go home now? So this is a development variance permit application. A accessory building on Cherry Point Road in Electoral Area D. The zoning is RR2, which specifies a minimum setback of 7.5 meters from the front parcel line, which is Cherry Point Road. However, the applicants have requested to reduce this to 4.5 meters. And this is largely to accommodate the fact that the bulk of the property is covered in a ravine. So they're proposing to build at the front of the lot, which would leave the ravine in its natural state. The applicants themselves built a new dwelling in, I believe, around 2017, and that's shown in the photo on the left where the car is parked in front of. And I've highlighted the areas where the proposed accessory building will be. In particular, the structure that is covered with a tarp, the carport structure frame will be there, but it will obviously have a new slab and walls and a proper roof. But the frame, that's essentially what the size and dimension will be. And you can also see a photo of the ravine. Staff is recommending approval of the variance, and just as an aside, there's no requirement here to request approval from the Ministry of Transportation because it complies with their minimum setback from a road also. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rondeau. Does the committee have questions for staff? Director Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering, top of page 3, it says rainwater will be directed through a rainwater catchment system for irrigation of the garden areas with overflow into perimeter drains, ultimately discharging to the ravine bottom. Are there any
Studies or
OCP or
anything?
regulations around discharge?
Ms. Rondo?
We have within our plan a desire to provide for on-site infiltration to the extent possible. In this particular case, when I was on site, the applicant mentioned that their intention is to catch some of the water because if you notice, they have some garden beds at the front of the property also. So that's in favor in that they're retaining some of the water and just not automatically letting it run off as overflow. We don't have any other sort of specific requirements if you're thinking about geotechnical.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, are the applicants with us today?
Yes, Damien Newfield is the applicant and he's in attendance.
Okay, Damien, do you have anything to add to the report so far?
No.
Excellent. You available if we have questions for you? Any questions from committee? Seeing none, turn to the alternate director for the area. Would you like to move the recommendation? Moved by alternate director Bomford, seconded by director Acton. Mr. Blackwell, would you read the recommendation, please?
Thank you. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that development variance permit application number DVP 18-D-01 at 1099 Cherry Point Road to vary section 5.274 of zoning bylaw number 3705 to decrease the minimum setback from the front parcel line from 7.5 meters to 4.5 meters be approved.
Any further discussion? Director Dory.
I wasn't quite sure, the opening to the garage, is it facing the road or is it facing the other direction? Or,
I haven't seen the building plans, so perhaps Damien can speak to that.
okay.
Please come up. Would you repeat the question, Mr. Dory? Director
Yeah.
Dory?
The opening for the carport, is it facing the roadway or is it facing another direction?
It would be facing the roadway.
Roadway. So you drive right off the roadway into the garage?
Yes.
Yeah. And you go past it to go to the house, is that it?
So we have the driveway that comes up to the front of the house.
Yeah.
So that garage there would be actually it's to store a boat.
Oh.
So that would be that you could come out
Oh,
of the
okay.
garage onto the road from there.
Yeah, so it's like a boathouse.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Seeing no further discussion, we'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion carries and will go to the board on Wednesday, April 11th. Next item is Ms. Herrera. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not as tall. Okay, got the right one. So the item before you now is development variance permit application, and it's relating to a rear parcel line setback for the property at 10844 Olson Road. And this property is in Electoral Area G. It's zoned R3, which is general residential, contains a single family dwelling, and the size of this lot is 1,097 square meters. And I've got a few photos. It's for the view of the current home from the street. And the south side parcel line and an outdoor amenity space at the rear. And there was a few other photos in the attachments as well. This is the site plan, and the applicant is proposing to reduce the rear parcel line setback from 4.5 meters to 1 meter, and it is for a new accessory building. The rationale was also provided in the report from the applicant, as well as a detailed analysis. And I'll just move to the recommendation, which was to approve this DVP. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee have any questions for staff? Is the applicant here today?
Yes, Mr. Arthur Simmons is in attendance and available for any questions as well.
Mr. Simmons, do you have anything to add? Excellent. Turn to the director for the area. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Director Kuhn. Mr. Blackwell, would you read the recommendation, please?
Thank you. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that development variance permit application number 002-G-17 DVP at 10844 Olson Road to vary section 5.4.4 of zoning bylaw number 2524 to reduce the rear parcel line setback for an accessory building from 4.5 meters to 1.0 meters be approved.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. Next item is Ms. Herrera again for 920 Chapman Road.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This next item is a development permit application relating to a two-lot subdivision at 920 Chapman Road. And a development permit is required because the property is located in the South Cowichan Rural Development Permit area. And this property is located in Electoral Area C. The lot is about 2.26 hectares and is zoned RR3, which is rural residential. The subdivision plan shows the parcel divided into two lots, each 1 hectare in area. And these lots meet the zoning bylaw requirements and the development permit area guidelines. And staff supports the application and recommends approval.
Thank you. Any questions from committee for staff? Seeing none, is the applicant with us today?
I thought they were coming, but they don't appear to be here today, so.
All right. Director Acton.
This is more a question for committee. I'd feel more comfortable if the director was here. Is this something that we can we wait?
My understanding is he's left for the day. He realizes this is on the agenda and we're here to conduct business in his absence or not. So, is there a person to move this recommended resolution? Moved by Director Nicholson. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Director Davis. Mr. Blackwell, could you read the recommended resolution?
Thank you. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board, 1, that development permit application number 08-C-17DP at 920 Chapman Road be approved, and 2, that the general manager of land use services be authorized to permit minor revisions to the permit in accordance with the intent of the development permit guidelines of OCP bylaw number 3510.
I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. And now the item we've all been waiting for. R5, Mr. Batstone. Cannabis.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon to the committee. I'll try to keep this brief, as you've recently seen a report in front of you a month ago at the March 17th EASC. But as I run through these slides, please don't hesitate to interrupt me if you have any questions. But it should serve as a reminder. So I won't read that out for everyone's benefit. It's a long recommendation, 4 parts. Again, you're all familiar with it, and the content of the slide reflects the report in front of you. So the overall purpose of this report is first to provide an update, a revision to one originally proposed land use bylaw definition in the report that was specifically for agricultural. So the amending bylaws contained in the report reflect those changes. They also reflect some minor textual edits that were recommended by our lawyer. But the broad purpose is to establish bylaw terminology for land uses to be regulated and identify the specific land uses that have been defined in our zoning bylaws, to identify where they're prohibited or permitted. And there's content in your report that speaks to the rationale to the amending bylaws. that are attached. But here's, in broad strokes, here's where we've been in the recent past. As you know from having read the report, as of December 2013, medical marijuana was a defined type of use in the CVRD and was allowed in the very specific areas where the government of Canada was allowing for the growth of medical marijuana. Marijuana for medical purposes is the way to put it. So that's why you see a definition in all our zoning bylaws right now that speaks to medical marijuana growing and processing, and there's a specific use category, varies depending on what bylaw you're reading in terms of its location in the bylaw and its section number, but it's broadly known as the medical marijuana regulations, and allows for growing and processing in the ALR lands and within some very limited industrial areas. So June 17th, community planning, in an attempt to acknowledge some recent changes to the Government of Canada's regulatory framework, attempted to put forward amending bylaws that received first and second reading at ESC. They never went anywhere. Long and short of it is the Government of Canada, again, changes regulations, and I don't think there was any appetite to proceed with the existing bylaw, as I understand it. So in March of 2018, again a month ago, community planning presented amending zoning bylaws. They're attached to your report. That, as you know, repeal would seek to repeal second reading of the previously provided amending zoning bylaws and propose comprehensive changes, which I'll speak to now, because they're more or less the same. So in these tables, you'll see in the top table the list of definitions that are consistent with a lot of Western Canadian municipalities, and for that matter, all across Canada, municipalities are attempting to define those 10 definitions in their zoning bylaws, because it helps you be able to either permit or prohibit, and other things after that. So the middle table, again, is the prohibited uses. I just want to emphasize that, because essentially this bylaw, it acknowledges what the Government of Canada is doing, and says locally you can only do so much. You're closing that door, and then we're going to open it up later as we understand more summer 2018 onwards. The medical marijuana, in the last box, medical marijuana regulations is proposed, as you know, to be replaced with the commercial cannabis regulation, and it essentially does three things. First one being it allows for medical and non-medical producers to requires medical and non-medical producers to possess and operate in conformity with the Government of Canada. That's the Government of Canada's thing through Health Canada. The next part is, two parts are design criteria, if we can call them that, or operational criteria. One, that all the structures, buildings, greenhouses must be provide a 30-meter setback from the property line. And then the last one is, and this is again fairly common across a lot of Canada, especially where big commercial scale production houses are in play. There's a community plan is proposing a setback of a minimum setback of 300 meters from specific sites, including parks, schools, and daycares, and from other land use zones, including residential, road, residential, park, institution, comprehensive, or mixed use. And this, I'm kind of in the weeds, so I apologize. It probably would have been a better report within the body of your report. But again, I just wanted to emphasize that as currently proposed, the top table shows areas where permitted uses, meaning cannabis-related businesses, cannabis production medical, cannabis production non-medical, and cannabis storefront retailing would be permitted, assuming the Government of Canada continues down this path, which we assume it does. On the far right of that table, you see the specific zones in which community planning has done their analysis and deemed that it's an appropriate location for these types of uses. And then the last part, we feel in community planning that we're taking the step to clarify that the growth of medical grade marijuana is allowable in ALR lands. As we all know, we've discussed this before, the province of British Columbia through the Farm Practices Protection Act have currently enshrined the right to grow marijuana on ALR land, so our tables now would reflect it, presuming that this bylaw moves forward. So in summary, here we have the stop, pause, and go chart, I'll call it. Top 4 points are let's stop what we're doing right now, take note of what's going on in the rest of Canada. We're going to amend our bylaws to prohibit temporarily, identify the uses before they come online are illegal so that we can control them, identify the land uses that we're comfortable prohibiting right out of the gate, identify the land uses that we want to permit straight out of the gate, because some of them are lawful, as we know. Then the pause phase would be start the community conversation. I can tell that the community conversation already started, but through the formal mechanism of the public hearing, and then continuing on with engagement through community, industrial sector, the industry sector, and learning from other senior governments will reshape these proposed bylaws to suit our communities. And then we'll go to on step 8, hit go when we know more. Until we know more, I don't have much more advice in this area. So I'll leave it at that for discussion, but I'll remind you of the recommendation, and feel free to pose
Thank
any
you,
questions
Keith.
on me.
And just before we get started, I'm going to recommend that whatever we decide on, that all directors be delegated to attend if they're so inclined, whatever public hearing that we have. So just be aware of that. And I would start a speakers list of questions for Mr. Batstone. Director Dory, did you have your hand up there a minute ago? Director Dory and Davis and anyone else?
Generally speaking, the regulation of marijuana.
Final follow-up?
Yeah, I just find the 10% a really arbitrary and changeable thing depending on the size, and it seems more logical and rational and to tie it to the license, right? You need a certain square footage to grow 4 plants or however many, and presumably you need a license for every person you provide home production for. Like, why can't we do that?
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you. Well, if we're looking at bylaw standards, it's hard to have, a list of all of the different growers and their license volume and say, at 123 A Street, you're allowed 40 square feet. At 3536 B Street, you're allowed 100 square feet, given that the volume that they are growing is different. And that's assuming, as I said earlier, that they would be willing to share those details. So based on my experience with this issue thus far, they're not going to be inclined to share any information with regard to what their growing license permits. So in the absence of that detail, we have to find another approach. And it could be, for instance, another arbitrary number, which is a maximum number of square feet. Now, if we were to prescribe that, we're just assuming. I mean, I don't know that Mr. Batstone is a marijuana cultivation expert, such that he could, specify precisely how much physical area of a home is required to not only store a plant, but the fertilizers and all the other equipment. So in the absence of having that level of expertise and then extrapolate across the board to all kinds of iterations of growing volumes, the only other option is just a general percentage. As subjective as it is, absolutely, it is subjective, but I don't know that there's a better tool.
Okay, so before I go back to Director Davis, the nature of the questions are kind of leading me to be a bit confused about what we're trying to achieve here. I thought this was about positioning for when we have clarity. Is that not the case? Like I know we can't fix licensed medical marijuana producers with this. We can't direct what the provincial government is suggesting for regulation on ALR lands. That we're simply saying, from what we know based on very limited knowledge, we can do this and we can't do this, and that as regulations become clearer, we will go into a process of clarifying our zoning and tweaking, yeah. And the other part to this is that whatever we're putting forth as suggested bylaws can't be as prescriptive and intrusive as we might like to fix some of these things, because it'll be rejected by the province even though we may approve it and send it off to them, they could reject any prescriptive fixes to situations we have. So is that still kind of what we're doing?
In my opinion, yes.
Oh, good, thanks. Okay, Director Davis.
Thank you. In the recommendations, it doesn't recommend that we send out referral notices. I was just wondering what the pros and cons of that would be.
Mr. Batstone, you want to take that?
One of the pros is timeliness, but the rationale was that community planning felt that this was a CVRD local issue that didn't require outside referral.
Thank you.
Well, I turn to committee and ask if there's any other questions for staff, any clarification. We have a fairly lengthy resolution, which, do we need it read out for people at home? Yes, we do. Director Nicholson.
So maybe we should make an extra effort to communicate about this one, and I suspect it'll be quite popular, and I'm not sure the boardroom's going to be adequate if we all do it together.
We can certainly plan for a site and a meeting place that will accommodate all of those that are interested. So are we looking in this recommendation, is it designating the boardroom? Yeah, I'm looking through. Forward to the board. We can actually, just about the recommendations. Be recommended. That be held, okay. So Mr. Blackwell, I think maybe for purposes of clarity, please read out the recommendation that we're going to vote on.
Thank you. So I have taken the liberty to adjust this based on what I've heard. And it's particular, the adjustments I've made are in point 4. So that's the key piece. So the recommendation as adjusted before you is that it be recommended to the board, 1, that second reading of zoning amendment bylaws number 4118, 4119, 4120, 4121, 4122, 4123, 4124, and 4125 be rescinded. 2, that zoning amendment bylaws numbers 4118 through 4123, sorry, let me try that again. That is zoning amendment bylaws numbers 4118 through 4125 be good grief, excuse me, be amended in accordance with attachments A through H and be forwarded to the board for consideration of second reading as amended, and that zoning amendment bylaw numbers 4118 through 4125 be amended in accordance with attachments A through H and not be referred to any external agencies. And here's the key one, that a public hearing for zoning amendment bylaw numbers 4118 through 4125 as amended per attachments A through H be held with all directors from the electoral areas be delegated to attend on behalf of the board.
Do we have a mover? Moved by Director Kuhn. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Director Davis. Is there any further discussion? I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Batstone. That was a big chunk of work. Mr. Blackwell, is there any unfinished business?
There is no unfinished business, Mr. Chair.
Any new business?
And no new business.
We're now at question period. Is there anyone in the gallery that has any questions for the chair?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question. So for those existing cannabis grow facilities, were building permits issued for those purpose-built buildings or refits of existing buildings?
That's a great question. Given that we may not know where they all are, I will have to take that under advisement because, and get an answer for you, because there was no local government involvement in the issuing of those licenses.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Does the board have the confidence?
Pardon me?
Does the board have the confidence that the federal and provincial governments will respect these proposed zoning bylaws?
I can't speak on behalf of the board. That might be a question you can ask the chair of the board at the next board meeting when these are considered.
I will revise that to this committee.
We would hope that the work that our staff have put forward, that we've given a lot of consideration to, would be respected by other levels of government, but we know, and as you know, that that isn't always the case.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Throughout all of this, when cannabis was first being allowed to be grown by private enterprises, the Health Canada application forms stated that the applicants must abide by all zoning and building requirements. So if the RCMP, the local governments, the fire departments don't know where these buildings are, how could they have complied with zoning and building requirements?
It's a brilliant question, and to my understanding is not even the RCMP may not be aware of some of the locations or the likes. So it's a challenging area, and we enforce where we can, and we work with the RCMP where we can. And it's, I guess, an example of some legislation from other levels of government that weren't very accommodating and respecting of local government jurisdiction and roles and responsibilities.
And I think that's where the request for advocacy on the part of the community is asked of this committee and ultimately the board. There is a pushback from other areas in regards to this. And there was an expectation for those people, particularly in the residential areas, that are very adversely affected by cannabis grow operations, that moving forward, these new regulations would provide some relief. And was I correct in hearing Mr. Blackwell say that those operations would be grandfathered? And what is that based upon?
I believe you heard him say that in regards to specific licenses that are in force that under specific circumstances may be grandfathered, or we don't know if the government plans to expire licenses or what the resolution of the current medical growing licenses are at this point, at least to my understanding. So if they continue to renew licenses for the medical growing of marijuana and somebody's got an existing operation, they may be grandfathered. But we still don't know what the resolution of those licenses will be because they're issued by a different level of government.
Thank you for that. So moving forward with this, this will be going to public hearing. And once the public hearing, is there going to be any information sessions beforehand, before you go to public hearing? Because it is my understanding of procedures, once you have a public hearing, the committee and the board can no longer accept any more information. So how is the public going to have an opportunity before you go to public hearing to have input?
I think just great questions like that, and we've got time between now and consideration of this at the board to ask staff what the rollout of this information will be, and we'll probably have better clarity of this at the board. These are recommended to go forward, and I think we've heard you that you'd like to have some robust engagement and information sharing before that. So we'll see what we can do on that front.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions from the gallery? And I think you were about 7.5 minutes there, so we got a little bit of time left. Cliff, be kind.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I understand that you're going to have a public hearing. So is that going to be for the full 7 districts?
You mean 9 electoral
Or 9,
areas?
rather?
Yes.
Do you think that the boardroom will be big enough?
We've addressed that. We're going to have it at a meeting place appropriate to accept all those that want to come.
Yes, I think there would be quite a bit of interest in that. I would really like to see us push these laws if we can get to enforce them, because 90 meters, I believe it is, from a parcel line would probably eliminate a lot of the grow ops within subdivisions if it can be enforced, and maybe if they're not grandfathered. So would it be possible to find out where it states that these should be grandfathered, or even if in fact they are grandfathered?
I think that was a supposition, I believe. I don't think there's any declaration by Mr. Blackwell or this committee that there's for sure going to be grandfathered, because we don't know. So I think your question is, how do we determine if they're going to be grandfathered? I think a lot will determine on what the terms and conditions of growing licenses are, which we don't issue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Well, committee, there's no closed session. Motion to adjourn. Moved by Director Davis, seconded by Director Kuhn. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion carries. Thank you very much, everyone.